The day humanity had long awaited and feared in equal measure finally arrived on a crisp autumn morning. Dr. Samantha Chen stood in the control room of the Arecibo Observatory, her eyes fixed on the pulsing light on her console. The signal was unlike anything they had ever received before, a clear, rhythmic pattern that could only be artificial in origin. "This is it," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of equipment. "First contact." As news of the alien signal spread, the world held its collective breath. Governments scrambled, scientists worked around the clock, and ordinary people looked to the stars with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Humanity's place in the universe was about to change forever. Weeks later, the first Etherian ships appeared in Earth's orbit. They were sleek, crystalline structures that seemed to shimmer and shift in the sunlight, defying human understanding of physics and engineering. As the alien vessels descended towards the United Nations headquarters in New York, crowds gathered to witness history in the making. Dr. Chen found herself at the forefront of the welcoming committee, alongside world leaders and military personnel. Her expertise in xenolinguistics had made her an invaluable asset in this unprecedented moment. As the Zephyrian delegation emerged from their ship, Samantha's breath caught in her throat. The aliens were tall, willowy beings with iridescent skin that seemed to ripple with colors. Their large, almond-shaped eyes held an intelligence that was both familiar and utterly alien. The lead Zephyrian, introduced as Ambassador Zorn, stepped forward. "Greetings, humans of Earth." Zorn's voice resonated in perfect English, though their mouth didn't move. "We come in peace, seeking to expand our galactic community." The initial exchanges were cordial, filled with diplomatic niceties and cultural presentations. But as the days wore on, the true nature of the Zephyrians began to reveal itself. They were not the benevolent teachers humanity had hoped for, but rather condescending observers who viewed Earth as little more than a quaint curiosity. During a tour of a human research facility, Ambassador Zorn couldn't contain their amusement. "How charming," they said, examining a state-of-the-art quantum computer. "It reminds me of the toys we give our younglings to play with." Dr. Chen felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. She had dedicated her life to advancing human knowledge, and to have it dismissed so casually stung deeply. The Zephyrians' ridicule wasn't limited to human technology. They found human physiology equally amusing. During a demonstration of human athletic prowess, a Zephyrian scientist named Vex laughed openly. "Your strongest can barely lift 500 of your Earth kilograms." Vex chuckled. "Our children can manipulate objects 10 times that mass with their minds alone." As the days turned to weeks, the initial awe humans felt towards the Zephyrians turned to resentment. The aliens' constant belittling of human achievements and capabilities wore thin on even the most patient diplomats. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of cultural exchange, Dr. Chen found herself in a secure briefing room with a select group of scientists and military personnel. General Marcus Steele, a grizzled veteran with more stars on his shoulder than most people had seen in person, addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice grave, "it's time we level the playing field. Dr. Emerson, if you would." Dr. Liam Emerson, a brilliant physicist with a mop of unruly hair, stood up. He looked nervous but determined. "What I'm about to share with you is classified at the highest level," he said. "For the past decade, we've been working on a project called Quantum Synapse." The room fell silent as Dr. Emerson explained. Quantum Synapse was a revolutionary technology that allowed for direct neural interface with quantum systems. It essentially gave the human mind the ability to perceive and manipulate quantum states directly. In layman's terms, Dr. Emerson continued, it allows a trained individual to perform feats that will appear superhuman or even magical to an outside observer. Telekinesis, rapid healing, enhanced strength and speed all become possible by manipulating the quantum fabric of reality itself. The room erupted in a cacophony of questions and exclamations. Dr. Chen's mind reeled at the implications. This technology could change everything, not just in their interactions with the Zephyrians, but for humanity as a whole. General Steele raised a hand for silence. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said, "but we're at a crossroads. The Zephyrians think we're primitive, weak. We need to show them that humanity is not to be underestimated." Dr. Chen found her voice. "But sir, revealing this technology, it could be seen as an act of aggression. We don't know how the Zephyrians will react." The general nodded. "You're right, Doctor. That's why we're not going to reveal it outright. We're going to demonstrate it, subtly at first, and gauge their reactions. And that's where you come in." He turned to address the room at large. "Each of you has been selected for your expertise and your discretion. We need you to integrate quantum synapse technology into your respective fields without raising suspicion. Dr. Chen, your linguistic skills make you the perfect candidate to be our first quantum synapse operator in the field." Samantha felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the potential. She thought of all the times she had gritted her teeth as the Zephyrians mocked human capabilities. Now she had the chance to show them just how wrong they were. As the meeting concluded and the team dispersed to begin their secret preparations, Dr. Chen couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Humanity had been dismissed and ridiculed, but they had an ace up their sleeve. The Zephyrians thought they knew the limits of human potential, but they were about to learn just how wrong they were. In the weeks that followed, subtle changes began to occur in human performance across various fields. Athletes broke world records by margins that seemed impossible. Scientists made breakthroughs in physics and medicine that left even the Zephyrians puzzled. And in diplomatic meetings, human representatives began to display an uncanny ability to understand and communicate in Zephyrian languages without the need for translation devices. Ambassador Zorn and their delegation grew increasingly perplexed, and though they tried to hide it, concerned. The humans they had dismissed as primitive were suddenly making advancements at a rate that defied explanation. During a high-level meeting between human and Zephyrian leaders, Dr. Chen sat quietly, her mind interfaced with the quantum synapse system. She could perceive the quantum fluctuations in the room, reading the subtle shifts in the Zephyrians' energy fields that betrayed their true emotions. As a Zephyrian scientist presented data on their latest technological achievement, Samantha noticed a flaw in their calculations. Without thinking, she spoke up, pointing out the error and suggesting a solution in flawless Zephyrian. The room fell silent. Ambassador Zorn stared at her, their iridescent skin flickering with what Samantha now recognized as surprise and unease. "Dr. Chen," they said slowly, "I was not aware that humans had progressed so far in understanding our advanced mathematics and language." Samantha smiled, feeling a small thrill of satisfaction. "We're quick learners, Ambassador," she replied. "Perhaps there's more to humanity than meets the eye." As the meeting concluded, Samantha could sense a shift in the Zephyrians' attitude. The dismissive amusement was gone, replaced by a wary curiosity. They were beginning to realize that humanity was not the simple, primitive species they had initially judged them to be. But even as Samantha reveled in this small victory, a part of her worried about the future. The quantum synapse technology was a game-changer, but it was also dangerous. In the wrong hands, it could be devastating. And there was no telling how the Zephyrians would react if they discovered the true source of humanity's sudden leap forward. As she left the meeting room, Samantha's quantum synapse-enhanced senses picked up a conversation between two Zephyrian officials, speaking in what they thought was a secure, encrypted channel. "This doesn't make sense," one said. "Their advancement curve is impossible. We need to find out what's really going on." "Agreed," the other replied. "Perhaps it's time we issued a more direct challenge to these humans. Test their limits and see what they're truly capable of." Samantha's heart raced as she hurried to report this new development to General Steele. The game was changing, and the stakes were about to get much higher. Humanity had shown a glimpse of its hidden strength, but the real test was yet to come. As the sun set over New York, casting the Zephyrian ships in an ethereal glow, Dr. Samantha Chen couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something monumental. Humanity had taken its first steps into a larger universe, armed with a power they barely understood. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the galaxy would never be the same again. To be continued in Part 2, the Galactic Challenge. Several weeks passed since Private Matthew Henderson's humiliating encounter with Commander Aurora, but the sting of that moment never left him. He relived it in every waking moment: the mocking clicks of the Elysians, the pointed jabs at humanity's apparent physical frailty. Their smug superiority gnawed at his pride, but it also fueled a fire deep within him, a burning desire to prove that they were wrong. That fire smoldered as he trained alongside the towering aliens, enduring their ridicule with gritted teeth and silent resolve. He knew something they didn't. Today, Matthew found himself part of a joint human-Elysian squad, dispatched on an emergency mission to investigate a distress signal from an isolated Terran Elysian research outpost. The facility was located on a barren moon, devoid of atmosphere, a place so remote that the very idea of danger seemed absurd. Yet the distress signal had been frantic, a last-ditch cry for help before communications went dark. The squad's dropship descended silently onto the dusty surface, its thrusters kicking up plumes of grey dust. Matthew, clutching his rifle tightly, was the first to step off the ramp. His eyes scanned the bleak landscape, a desolate expanse of craters and jagged rock formations, with the dark silhouette of the research station looming ahead. The low gravity made each step feel like a leap, but it did little to ease the tension that knotted in his gut. "Stay sharp," barked Aurora, her mandibles clicking together in what could have been irritation or anxiety. It was hard to tell with her. She stood next to him, her towering, sleek form looking even more imposing against the barren backdrop. The rest of the squad, a mix of human and Elysian soldiers, fanned out behind them, weapons at the ready. As they approached the outpost, an eerie silence enveloped them. No alarms, no voices, just the faint hum of their own breathing through the filters of their environmental suits. The heavy, reinforced door of the facility stood ajar, the metal edges twisted as if something massive had forced its way inside. Matthew's grip on his rifle tightened. They stepped into the facility, the flickering emergency lights casting long, sinister shadows along the metallic walls. The air was thick with the scent of burnt wiring and something far worse: blood, and lots of it. The floor was littered with debris, shattered glass, overturned equipment, and deep gouges that marved the walls and floors. Something had torn through here, something feral and violent. Aurora's eyes narrowed as she surveyed the destruction. "This wasn't an accident," she hissed, her mandibles twitching in discomfort. "Stay close, human." Matthew suppressed the urge to roll his eyes. He wasn't the one who needed babysitting, especially now. They moved deeper into the facility, passing through corridors stained with what could only be described as a scene from a nightmare. In one corner, a shattered lab station was drenched in thick, dark blood. The gouges in the walls grew larger, more erratic, as if whatever had done this had been in a frenzy. Matthew's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. Suddenly, a deafening screech echoed through the corridor, a sound so alien and primal that it chilled Matthew to the bone. He whirled around, his rifle's flashlight cutting through the dim light, just in time to see something massive crash through the ventilation shaft. It was monstrous. The creature that emerged was unlike anything Matthew had ever seen. It stood on four serrated legs, its elongated body covered in thick, black chitin. Its insect-like head was crowned with mandibles the size of a man's arm, dripping with a sizzling, acidic drool that hissed when it hit the ground. Its compound eyes locked onto them with a hunger that sent a jolt of fear through the squad. "Open fire," Aurora shouted, her plasma rifle roaring to life. The rest of the squad followed suit, unleashing a torrent of plasma bolts and ballistic rounds at the creature. But the assault barely made a dent. The beast barreled forward, shrugging off the hits like they were nothing more than an annoyance. With terrifying speed, it lashed out with one of its barbed limbs, catching an Elysian soldier and flinging him against the wall like a rag doll. His exoskeleton cracked upon impact, the sickening sound of bone shattering reverberating through the hall. "Fall back," Aurora yelled, her voice tinged with rare panic. She didn't need to say it twice. The Elysians, so confident a moment ago, scrambled for the exit, leaving Matthew and a couple of wounded soldiers behind. Cowards. Matthew dove behind a metal crate, his rifle jammed after just a few shots. He cursed under his breath as the creature turned its attention toward him, its mandibles clicking with malevolent glee. It knew he was vulnerable. Desperation clawed at him as he struggled to clear the jam. His eyes flicked to the wounded Elysian soldier lying nearby, blood pouring from a gash in his exoskeleton. The others had abandoned him, left him to die, not Matthew. He might not trust the Elysians, but he wasn't going to let someone, anyone, die on his watch. He felt the cold weight of his dog tags against his chest. Inside those tags was more than just his identification. It was the key to unlocking humanity's hidden trump card. As the creature advanced, Matthew pulled the dog tags free and slammed his thumb against the small biometric scanner embedded in them. There was a moment of silence. Then, with a deafening crash, the wall behind him exploded inward. Dust and debris filled the air, and when it cleared, a sleek, black pod stood in the wreckage. The pod's doors hissed open, revealing a humanoid suit of armor, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. This was the Titan, humanity's greatest secret, the answer to their physical limitations, and the reason why they had no need for claws, spikes, or venom. Matthew didn't hesitate. He leaped into the armor, feeling it close around him like a second skin. The suit's systems hummed to life, his HUD lighting up with targeting data and status indicators. He flexed his fingers, watching as the suit's massive gauntlets mimicked his movements perfectly. It felt right. The insectoid creature screeched and charged at him, but Matthew was no longer afraid. He was no longer the weak, frail human that the Elysians mocked. He was something else now, something powerful. He raised his arm, and with a thought, the Titan's wrist cannons fired. Twin beams of energy lanced out, punching through the creature's armored hide and splattering the walls with its blood. The insectoid staggered, screeching in agony, but it was already too late. Matthew surged forward, his microfilament blades sliding out from the armor's gauntlets with a metallic snick. He slashed downward, severing the creature's head in one fluid motion. It was over in seconds. The silence that followed was deafening. Matthew stood over the remains of the creature, his breathing heavy inside the suit. The wounded Elysian soldier stared at him in disbelief, his mandibles slack. "Come on," Matthew said, his voice sounding strange through the suit's speakers. "Let's get you out of here." The Elysian nodded weakly, too stunned to speak. Together, they made their way toward the exit, but Matthew knew this was just the beginning. The Elysians had mocked humanity's weakness. Now they would see what humanity was truly capable of. And the galaxy would never be the same again. The corridors of the research facility echoed with the sounds of hasty retreat. The rest of the joint squad, both human and Elysian, regrouped near the entrance, their weapons drawn but their nerves frayed. The wounded Elysian Matthew had saved was barely able to walk, leaning heavily on him as they approached the others. Eyes widened as they saw Matthew, no longer in his standard-issue gear, but encased in the sleek, menacing Titan suit, carrying the injured alien as if it were a minor inconvenience. Commander Aurora's expression flickered between astonishment and fury. "What is that?" she hissed, pointing at the Titan armor. Matthew let the soldier down carefully, ignoring the sudden hostility in Aurora's tone. "This," he said, his voice steady, "is what you've been underestimating." The rest of the squad gawked at the wreckage behind him, the remains of the creature still smoldering. The Elysians, so used to considering themselves the peak of evolution, had just witnessed something they couldn't quite comprehend. Matthew could see the unease creeping into their expressions. It wasn't just the alien insectoid threat that unsettled them, it was the realization that humanity had been keeping secrets. Before anyone could respond, the emergency lights flickered, then blinked out. Darkness swallowed the corridor, broken only by the faint glow of their weapons and armor. A deep, mechanical rumble vibrated through the walls, and suddenly, the facility's PA system crackled to life. Warning. Hostile entities approaching Sector 7. All personnel evacuate immediately. Warning. The message repeated on a loop, its sterile, monotone voice somehow heightening the tension. Matthew's HUD flashed with new data, mapping the facility in real time. Sector 7 was where the research was focused, where the signal had originated. Something else was here, something worse. "We need to get out of here now," one of the human soldiers muttered, panic edging his voice. "No," Aurora snapped, stepping forward. "Our mission is to investigate the distress signal. We are not leaving until we know what happened here." Matthew stepped in front of her, towering in the Titan's suit. "Your orders are irrelevant if everyone dies. We regroup, figure out what we're dealing with, and then handle it properly." For a moment, their eyes locked, human and alien in a silent battle of wills. Aurora's mandibles twitched with irritation, but she knew as well as anyone that the situation was far beyond what they had expected. Reluctantly, she nodded. "We split into 2 teams," Matthew suggested. "One group gets the wounded back to the dropship. The rest of us push towards Sector 7. Aurora hesitated but then agreed. She barked orders in her native tongue, and soon the group had split. 3 Elysians carried their wounded comrade out, while the rest of the squad, 2 humans and 4 Elysians, including Aurora, prepared to move forward with Matthew. The trek through the facility felt like venturing deeper into a nightmare. The once pristine halls now felt claustrophobic, with every shadow holding potential threats. A low, almost imperceptible buzzing filled the air, growing louder the closer they got to Sector 7. The door to the research lab was in sight when a sudden screech pierced the darkness, followed by the unmistakable sound of skittering claws on metal. More of the creatures, drawn by the sounds of battle, poured through the ceiling vents and maintenance shafts. They were smaller than the first one, but no less deadly, fast, insectoid predators with razor-sharp mandibles and claws designed to rip through armor. Aurora was the first to fire, her plasma rifle lighting up the corridor in rapid bursts. The Elysians joined her, forming a defensive line, but the creatures were fast, closing the distance in seconds. "Hold the line," Matthew shouted as he raised his arm, the Titan's wrist cannon charging up. A pulse of energy blasted the lead creature into pieces, but more took its place, crawling over walls and ceiling to bypass the defenders. The humans and Elysians fought with all they had, but the creatures were relentless, their numbers overwhelming. One by one, the squad members fell back, struggling to hold the line as claws raked across armor and bodies. The screeches of the creatures mixed with the cries of wounded soldiers, the corridor becoming a scene of chaos. Matthew moved like a force of nature. The Titan's suit amplified his strength and speed, allowing him to tear through the creatures with brutal efficiency. With each swing of his arm, microfilament blades extended, slicing through chitin and bone. His HUD highlighted targets, guiding his strikes with deadly precision. But there were too many. "We need to seal that door," Matthew shouted, pointing to the entrance of Sector 7's research lab. He could see more creatures swarming from the vents, their screeches filling the air. Aurora growled, firing another volley at the incoming swarm. "I'll cover you. Go." Matthew didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the door, using the Titan's enhanced strength to slam his shoulder into it, breaking the damaged locking mechanism. The door hissed open, revealing the research lab beyond. As soon as he entered, the door began to slide shut behind him, but before it could fully close, something enormous crashed into it from the other side. The door buckled under the impact, and Matthew barely had time to turn before the entire room shook with the force of whatever was outside. Inside the lab, The scene was even worse than the rest of the facility. Broken equipment and shredded bodies littered the room, and at the center stood a massive containment unit, cracked and leaking strange, glowing fluid. But it wasn't the containment unit that drew Matthew's attention, it was what lay beyond it. In the shadows at the far end of the lab, something moved. At first, it seemed like more of the creatures from the corridors, but this one was different. It was larger, standing on two legs, and had an almost humanoid shape. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and in its hands, it held something that looked disturbingly like a weapon. The creature stepped forward, its chitinous armor gleaming under the flickering lights. It was no mindless beast. This thing was intelligent, and it was watching him, studying him. Matthew's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't flinch. He tightened his grip on the Titan's controls, ready for whatever came next. The creature tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing as it sized him up. Then it spoke, its voice a low, guttural growl that sent shivers down Matthew's spine. "Human," it rasped, the word dripping with disdain. "You are too late. The experiment is free." Before Matthew could respond, the creature lunged at him with terrifying speed, its weapon swinging down toward his head. Matthew reacted instinctively, raising his arm to block the strike. The impact reverberated through the Titan's suit, and for a moment, Matthew struggled to hold his ground. This thing was powerful, stronger than anything he'd faced so far. But Matthew wasn't just any human, he had the Titan. With a roar, he shoved the creature back and unleashed a barrage of energy blasts from his wrist cannons. The room lit up with the explosions, but the creature dodged with unnatural agility, disappearing into the shadows once more. Matthew's eyes darted around the room, his HUD struggling to track the creature's movements. It was fast, too fast. Suddenly, a voice crackled through his comms. "Henderson, what the hell is going on in there?" It was Aurora. The rest of the squad was still holding the corridor, barely keeping the creatures at bay. Matthew didn't have time to explain. "Something's in here with me. Some kind of leader. You need to fall back, now. We're not leaving you." Aurora barked, her voice filled with uncharacteristic concern. "We'll breach the door." "No," Matthew shouted. "Seal the door, now." There was a pause, then a frustrated growl from Aurora. "Fine, but you better survive, human." The comms went silent, and the door behind Matthew sealed with a heavy thud. He was alone now, trapped in the lab with whatever this thing was. The creature emerged from the shadows again, its eyes glowing brighter. It held up its weapon, a jagged, cruel-looking blade, and pointed it at Matthew. "You will not leave here alive," it snarled. Matthew tightened his grip on the Titan's controls, his heart pounding in his chest. "Wanna bet?" The creature charged, and Matthew prepared for the fight of his life. The creature's charge was like a force of nature, closing the gap between them in mere seconds. Matthew barely had time to react before the alien leader's jagged weapon swung down toward him, aiming for a deadly strike. But the Titan armor, enhanced by human ingenuity, was ready. Matthew parried the blow, sparks flying as the alien's blade clashed with the Titan's reinforced arms. He countered immediately, sending a crushing punch toward the creature's midsection. The hit landed with a resounding crack, sending the creature stumbling backward. But it didn't fall. Instead, it let out a guttural snarl and spun, slashing out with its weapon in a wide arc. Matthew ducked, feeling the blade whistle just inches above his head. He backed away, putting distance between them. His HUD was alive with warnings, power levels fluctuating, structural integrity at risk. But Matthew pushed the notifications aside. There was no time for hesitation. The creature circled him, its glowing eyes locked on his every move. It was intelligent, far more than the mindless swarm he had encountered earlier, and it had the advantage of speed, darting in and out of the shadows with blinding agility. Matthew needed to slow it down. He activated the Titan's targeting systems, launching a barrage of micro-missiles from his shoulders. The missiles screamed through the air, detonating around the alien leader in a storm of fire and shrapnel. The room shook with the explosions, smoke filling the air. For a moment, there was silence. Matthew scanned the smoke, his fingers tense on the controls. His heart raced, every instinct screaming that it wasn't over. And then from the haze, the creature emerged, its armor scorched but intact. It moved with terrifying speed, lunging toward him with a snarl. "Damn it," Matthew muttered, bracing himself for impact. The creature's blade slashed down, and this time it found its mark. The edge of the weapon sliced across the Titan's arm, cutting through the reinforced plating with a screech of metal. Red warning lights flashed across Matthew's HUD, and he felt the Titan's systems strain under the damage. But he couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. With a roar, Matthew swung his arm, using the Titan's full strength to knock the creature back. The alien staggered, but before it could recover, Matthew charged forward, tackling it to the ground. The impact sent shockwaves through the room, and Matthew pinned the creature beneath him, raising his arm to deliver the final blow. But the creature wasn't done yet. It twisted with inhuman strength, freeing one of its arms and slashing at Matthew's leg. The blade bit deep, and Matthew's grit faltered as pain flared through his body. The creature shoved him off, rolling to its feet with a hiss. Its glowing eyes were wild, filled with hatred and a desire to kill. Matthew struggled to stand, the Titan suit's movements sluggish under the damage. His mind raced, searching for a way to turn the tide. He needed to end this now, before the creature could finish him off. The creature lunged again, its blade raised for the killing strike. And then, in a flash of inspiration, Matthew saw his chance. At the last second, he sidestepped the attack, letting the creature's momentum carry it forward. As it stumbled past him, Matthew activated the Titan's thrusters, launching himself toward the cracked containment unit at the center of the room. With a powerful punch, he shattered the glass, releasing the glowing fluid within. The liquid spilled across the floor, creating a shimmering pool between him and the alien leader. The creature hesitated, its eyes narrowing as it realized what Matthew had done. It let out a low growl, stepping forward. And then it froze. The fluid wasn't just any substance. It was part of the experiment, the same experiment that had caused the entire facility to fall into chaos. The moment the alien touched the liquid, its body convulsed, its armor cracking and splintering. The creature let out a shriek of agony, its limbs twitching as the fluid burned through its defenses. Matthew watched as the alien leader collapsed to the ground, writhing in pain. Its glowing eyes dimmed, and finally it lay still, defeated. For a moment, there was only the sound of Matthew's heavy breathing, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. He had won, but at a cost. The Titan suit was heavily damaged, and his body ached from the strain of the fight. But he had survived. He activated his comms, his voice strained but steady. "Aurora, the creature is down. It's over." There was a pause, and then Aurora's voice crackled through the comms, filled with relief. "We're on our way. Hold your position." Matthew lowered his arm, letting out a long breath. He glanced at the creature's body, its once imposing form now a twisted, broken shell. Whatever this thing had been, it was no longer a threat. But as he stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of the lab, Matthew couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The experiment, the creatures, they were all part of something larger, something more dangerous. And he had a sinking suspicion that the real battle was yet to come. The doors to the lab slid open, and Aurora, along with the remaining members of the squad, rushed in. They looked around, their eyes wide with shock at the destruction. Aurora's gaze fell on the creature's body, and for a moment she said nothing. Then she looked at Matthew, her expression a mixture of respect and disbelief. "You actually did it." Matthew gave a tired nod, his body sagging with exhaustion. "Yeah, but we need to leave. Now, whatever this was, it's not the end. There's more to this than we thought." Aurora's eyes narrowed, but she didn't argue. She turned to the squad, barking orders. "Secure the area. We're getting out of here." As they moved to secure the lab, Matthew glanced at the creature's body one last time. He had won this battle, but the war, the unseen war that had been waged in the shadows, was far from over. And he knew that when it came, humanity would be ready. As the squad moved through the facility, Matthew's thoughts raced. The alien leader had spoken of an experiment. What was it? Who had authorized it, and why had it gone so wrong? His gut told him that this wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of something much bigger, something that could threaten not just this facility, but the entire galaxy. They made their way back to the entrance, where the dropship was waiting. The facility had fallen silent, the swarm of creatures seemingly gone. But the eerie quiet only heightened Matthew's unease. He could feel it in the air, a sense of unfinished business. As they boarded the dropship, Aurora looked at him, her eyes still filled with uncertainty. "What do you think that was?" Matthew shook his head. "I don't know, but we need to find out." The dropship lifted off, leaving the facility behind as they soared into the sky. But Matthew knew this wasn't the end. There were questions that needed answers, and he was determined to get them. As the stars stretched out before them, Matthew's mind was already turning toward the future. He had faced the unseen war once, and he knew it was only a matter of time before it came for them again. This time, humanity would be ready. As the dropship soared through the atmosphere, Matthew replayed the battle in his mind. The alien leader, the experiment gone wrong, the strange liquid, it all pointed to something far more sinister than anyone had anticipated. Aurora sat beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon, but her mind seemed elsewhere. "That wasn't just some random experiment," she finally said, breaking the silence. Matthew nodded grimly. No, it wasn't. They knew what they were doing, and it got out of control. The dropship's cockpit beat, interrupting them. The pilot spoke up. "We're getting some odd readings from the facility we just left. It looks like energy surges." Before anyone could react, the horizon behind them lit up with a blinding flash. A massive explosion engulfed the facility, sending shockwaves through the air. The crew was thrown back in their seats, alarms blaring. "They're covering their tracks," Aurora whispered, her face pale. "Someone didn't want us to find out the truth." Matthew clenched his fists. Whoever was behind this had just made it personal.